The GM got really distracted by nonsense arguments about Pokemon and then went to go buy Pokemon cards, and we haven't seen him back since, so like session's canceled, I guess.
No, I heard it's too late. I heard you cracking at the seams.
I did, yes.
Oh my god. I was like, please start. I can't hold it.
I had to compose my soul. I couldn't go straight into it.
Oh my god.
Tell us in the chat, is Toxicroak from Pokemon intended to be a ninja frog? Let us know your opinions in the comments.
Yeah. Okay.
Is he a ninja frog?
I am of the opinion of yes, he is a ninja frog.
I'm firmly on no, but I don't know. I'm not even no, I'm like a tentative maybe. We're not talking about ninja frogs or Pokemon though, mostly because I don't actually care that much about Pokemon anymore. I feel like every time I bring up Pokemon, I feel like I'm a recovering, like, alcoholic or something.
You do have the, like, we talk about Pokemon, but then you're like, but I don't do that anymore.
Yeah, well, because I used to be deep in that sauce. So, like, there's
it's
a period
kind of like
there.
when a specific friend of ours is like, oh, yeah, I used to go to raves and do Molly, but I don't do that anymore. You're like, whoa, wait, fucking pedal that shit back.
I mean, not quite to the same extreme, but sure, yeah.
Oh my god. It's like, what's the fucking bit in Adventure Time when it's like, when Jake was like, oh yeah, that was back in the day when I used to mug old ladies before I knew it was wrong. And you're like, fucking.
yeah. Or a certain other friend who told us about being in a band out of nowhere. We were like,
his tragic backstory.
Yes. Yeah, how he used to get into fights all the time and we didn't believe him.
Yeah, how he went from skinny string bead to fucking swole jack.
Swollen violent. Anyway. Two friends in question know who you are.
I can't wait to hear from them in chat.
Both of you know who you are.
You're gonna jump into VC being like, all right, fuck you.
Anyway. We're not here on Pokemon business, though. We're here on Stars Without Number business, which I was gonna make some kind of joke about how it's like Pokemon, but I can't actually justify that. So
I would have been impressed, truly.
Yeah, I couldn't think I if I had time, I probably could have come up with something. Anyway, it's fine. Also, did I say Stars Without Number?
I think you did.
Did I? Ashes Without Number. Listen, they're 4 games, but they're kind of 1 game, you know? So, like, your brain kind of smushes them together.
It do kind of feel like 3 expansions to 1 game.
It kind of is, yeah, in a way. Yeah. Yes, we're back at it again at the Krispy Kreme with Ashes Without Number. And we're going to go over the GM side of things, as is our ritual. And yeah, I mean, let's give it that skibbity. Before we do though, hit follow or subscribe on your podcast platform of choice, and if you're feeling generous, there's a donation link in the description. So Ashes Without Number. All right, so we wrapped up on the identifying mysterious tech rule, which is a rule that I was not a huge fan of. And that sort of generally cuts the book in half from the PC to the GM section. Much like all the other books, there's not actually a delineated point of this is for GM and this is for PCs, but you can kind of just tell. So, the GM section starts off with enclaves and settlements, which, if you'll have the familiarity with the other Without Number games, this is basically our faction turn replacement. Cities Without Number actually forego the faction turn entirely, and instead just had more detailed rules about like designing missions and designing megacorps and designing like faction, like enemy faction gangs. But we're back at it with the faction turn, sorta. Enclaves and settlements. It serves the same purpose as the faction term, but it's kind of simplified down, and the scope is quite a lot smaller because you're dealing with post-apocalypse. So, you know, Stars Without Number, you can have factions that are literally sector-wide regional hegemons that like own multiple planets and shit. So obviously you're not going to get onto that level of craziness with a post-apocalypse game. That would be, a little off color. So instead you have enclaves and settlements, which, brings the power scale way down, if you want to phrase it that way. If you want to talk about power scaling, which I know is Isaiah's favorite thing to do in the world.
It isn't. I keep getting sucked into these conversations, but it really
no, it clearly is, Isaiah. You keep doing it. So obviously.
No. Someone brings up fucking power scaling and then they do it in a chat that I specifically get pinged on. So I'm getting fucking interrupted doing whatever the fuck I'm doing. Be looking at like, I don't know, if fucking Scrimblow Bimblow can beat Glup Shido in a fight. And I'm like, and then they're like, well, clearly, because the fucking mangaka was in rehab at the time, that means that this character is stronger. And you're like, what the fuck are you talking
because
about?
Because the mangaka was in rehab, Glup Shido has a debuff.
Yeah,
he has the sickly mangaka debuff.
Look, I could only have my fucking neurons be insulted so much before I gotta say some shit.
Okay. All right, so, all right, the Enclave rules. I mean, do you have any initial opinions before you started getting into this? Because I know that this is something you really wanted to do in your game.
Yeah, once again, take a shot, because we're continuing that game of every time Isaiah was like, oh, this would have been fucking great for me. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, this pretty much did this in, about 3 times as much words, but triple the cohesion. Did everything that I was trying to do with like my citadels and guild system.
Yeah.
And like it even gives you some like pretty interesting stuff a little bit later on for like how to get them to coexist, and like if one is attacking the other for resources or trading with the other or building settlements, all that stuff that I had to like kind of hand wave, and then I pretty much fucking gave up on towards the end because it just was like not feeling how I wanted it to feel.
Sounds about right, yeah. Yeah, I mean, the thing about having some kind of faction turn S mechanic is it's not gonna slot onto every game, every style of game. It's gotta... The conceit of the campaign needs to fit in such a fashion that idea flows.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, so you start by you start the whole thing by deciding a starting enclave. This is generally where the PCs are going to begin play. It is also worth pointing out that the factions or the enclave settlement system is going to work best in the Mutant Wasteland style of campaign. As a reminder, we have the Mutant Wasteland style of game, which is sort of your Mad Max or your Fallout style post-apocalypse, where society is sort of settled into a kind of weird new norm, even though the new norm is horrible. And then you have your Deadlands campaign, which is your Walking Dead style zombie apocalypse situation. And then you have After the Fall, which is like natural disaster has caused everything to go into complete shit, and you're playing in the like near immediate aftermath of said disaster. So the settlements, the enclaves and settlements thing is gonna slot easiest into the Mutant Wasteland, and then it probably could still work in the Deadlands style campaign, depending on how what span of time you want the Deadlands game to cover. And then the After the Fall one, probably the hardest time making that fit, because generally the way the book talks about an After the Fall campaign is the timeline that it's covering is pretty short, usually like a few months at most kind of thing. So you're probably not going to have enclaves. But anyway, so yes, you start by deciding where the PCs are going to start their starting enclave. They don't necessarily have to be tied to it or anything, but it's kind of going to be their like default home base in some capacity. They might not even be wanted there, but it's kind of the place they might go back to or whatever. Then the book recommends picking 5 enclaves near the starting enclave, and you can do more, but you probably don't want to. And instead, if you start adding additional settlements, just don't make them enclaves, just make them smaller settlements that are just kind of minding their own business. Because the enclaves are going to actively interact with each other mechanically through this whole process. So if you add too many, your homework is going to get crazy, which as someone who ran Stars Without Number can confirm, if you have too many factions, your homework does get crazy. So like, you do want to be careful about that. It is worth pointing out, you don't have to do faction turns every single session, right? You're doing them every few sessions usually, but still. And then, yeah, basically you kind of ignore the other communities that are not like enclaves, the ones that aren't as important. Not ignore as in they don't exist, but ignore them in the mechanical framework of this system. So you start by determining the power of the enclave, which goes from like a refugee camp or a little tribal village all the way up to multi-regional hegemonic city or multi-city power. And it's a 1 to 5 scale. Initial, you determine the power. So 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5. And then the power determines the enclave's action die, which goes from a D6 to a D20. The action die is what they will roll to sort of attack each other or sometimes deal with problems. It's sort of their singular stat that they kind of use to deal with things. Then your enclave has cohesion, which is equal to your enclave's power, and it's just the enclave's HP, basically, is the cohesion. Once the cohesion drops down, fictionally speaking, the enclave has become such a mess that nobody wants to be there anymore, and so everybody fucks off and goes and does their own thing. They are not cohesive as a settlement anymore. Then you have features. This one's kind of interesting because the features don't have a numerical value attached to them, which is pretty different to how the faction turn worked for Stars and Worlds, where in Stars Without Number and Worlds Without Number, you bought assets, and your assets had like numerical data points. They had like an attack and a defense value and like an HP value and stuff. And assets would do very specific things. They weren't the assets were more like abilities that you bought for the faction, whereas the features here are more like they're more like fictional tags that you describe in like a sentence or a couple of sentences. So like one example it gives is features, or what it says is features aren't measured numerically. Instead, they're usually expressed in a single sentence, like the camp is constructed on a large grain depot, or the tribe's warriors are exceptionally well armed and disciplined. The features will then, the sentence of the feature, like what the feature is, the tag as it were, is relevant because if you describe that they have a large grain depot and then you try to say, oh, this enclave wants to attack another enclave and the only thing they have is a grain depot, then they kind of can't attack them because they just have no means of doing so. So even though they don't have a bespoke mechanical effect, what you describe the feature as when you're writing it down as the GM is relevant. And then if there's I was
going to say, to be clear though, like, yes, they don't have a bespoke numerical effect, but the sort of narrative informs the function insofar as when something makes a move against another one, you use its features to its advantage by adding to rolls.
Well, yeah, that's what I was saying. If they only have a grain depot, they can't attack.
Yes, but like you could use, like, if you were going to use like a hostile action, you could be worded like, yes, they're going to starve them out, and because they have a grain depot, they can do that.
Oh, I mean, yes, like it can. Yeah, if you can make it make sense. Honestly, I think the point of what you're supposed to do with the features more than anything is use them to describe the narrative of what's happening. Like, Enclave A uses their feature against Enclave B, and based on how you worded the feature, that informs what the story will become when the players hear about what happened. I think that's kind of the intention of that.
Almost certainly, yeah.
Also, when you have particularly complicated features, you can string together like a small paragraph where each sentence is kind of a different element of the feature, and you have to break down each part of the feature if you want to destroy the feature, or if an enemy faction wants to destroy the feature, I should say. Then you have problems, which are the opposite of features, as they kind of sound. Problems are literally fictional problems that you describe, such as food supplies are inadequate and people often go hungry, right? That is a problem in the within the enclave. But problems do get a numerical value attached to them. Usually it's only 1 point, maybe 2 points if it's a particularly bad problem. And then you have the enclave's trouble score, which is all of the problems added together is their trouble score. So if you have the problem of no food and the problem of like trauma, as it describes, trauma and despair has left people numb, and those are both 2-point problems, you add them together, you have a trouble score of 4. If your trouble score ever equals your maximum action die roll, the community falls apart. So if your action die is a D10, you effectively have 10 like points of problems that you can deal with, and actually 9, because if you hit 10, you fucked. So you kind of have 2 HP values, because you have cohesion, which can drop from getting attacked, and then you have trouble, which can go up from problems getting worse. Both of them have the ability to rip your enclave apart. Then you have interest. I don't like the word interest for this mechanic. I don't necessarily have a better word, but interest confused me because it made me think it had some kind of monetary thing.
Numerical interest, and not like they have a vested vested interest.
Yes, a vested interest is what they're getting at. But yes, it made me think numerical. It's not numerical. So interest is the idea that your enclave has some kind of influence or ability to help or harm their neighbors. It can be good or bad. So like planting spies, building trade routes, installing and occupying garrison, those are all interest. So if the PC's enclave installs a garrison in a nearby enemy enclave, they have that as a point of interest in that enclave. The points of interest will be used for some various actions. You can't have more points of interest in any of your neighbors more than twice your maximum action die roll. So like if your action die is a D10, you can have 20 points of interest total. There's only so much you can spread around your community's influence. And then we have Dominion, which is another one that's weird. So the Dominion is kind of the money, which again, slightly confusing on the name there. But Dominion is effectively a meta currency that the Enclave can spend to help themselves out in various ways. So those are all your stats. So you have power, cohesion, features, problems, trouble, interest, Dominion. So every Enclave kind of has a lot of stats.
I kind of wish it numbers. I was gonna say I almost wish Dominion was called wealth, but like it's more than just their physical money. It's like
more than money.
Their influence.
Yeah.
So maybe then just would call it influence then, but maybe that would conflict with like
influence would conflict with interests.
Yeah.
I don't know. That's the way it's called wealth in the other two games, but that makes more sense in those settings, you know?
Yeah.
Also, the other thing too, the reason it's not called wealth is because there's a good chance that your post-apocalypse doesn't have money, you know?
True,
like money in the traditional sense. So that's your setup for your Enclave, and then you have your Enclave turn. So every Enclave gets You have two kinds of actions. You have internal and external actions, which are pretty much what they sound like. You can perform. You can perform one internal action per turn. And generally internal actions are gonna be building up features or dealing with problems. And then you can have as many external actions as you have power. So like if you have 3 power, you can perform 3 external actions. It also does specifically say not all enclaves are necessarily going to do everything every enclave turn. So if you have a reason to assume that this enclave isn't doing anything, they're just chilling, then that's fine. Some actions will require you to make a trouble check. This is where you roll your action die and then see if it's equal or less than your trouble rating. And then based on the number you roll, that will help you to pick which problem is causing trouble. Problem with a capital P, your problem scores.
Right.
Then there's contests, which are basically what they sound like, contests between two factions attacking each other. You roll your action dice versus each other, see who wins the numerical contest. And like I was saying before, the attacker states what they are trying to accomplish and the names of the features they are using to do it. The feature must actually have something to do with the effort. A magnificent school system isn't very useful if the attacker's goal is to burn down their enemy's granary. So the features have to make sense for the action. It's kind of funny because the way he words it in this, the way he words the enclave turn makes it sound like you're having this debate with the players, but you're not.
Yeah, no, it's you.
It's you arguing with yourself. So you worded it a little weirdly about us, but whatever.
Now remind me, did earlier games tell you when these rolls are supposed to take place? Like I know it says in game every month or so, but do you do this at the table? Do you do this out of table?
Between sessions.
All right, that's what I figured, because this will take you like 30, 45 minutes.
Stars Without Number, it would take me like an hour usually to do a faction turn.
Yeah, I figured as much.
Yeah. But yes, definitely you want to do this between the intention is you do it between sessions, so like the players finish a big adventure or whatever, and then some time passes, and then you do it between sessions, and the time having passed sort of changes the game state, and then you inform the players in some fashion how the game state has changed. So like in Stars Without Number, they get like news reports or something like that, or a phone call from like a boss or whatever telling them that something happened. Obviously with this game, it's going to be a little bit of a different vibe in terms of updating the players and stuff, but yeah. So yes, then that's how the contest rolls deal. Basically, the two sides roll against each other, and then if you feel like the contest, you being the GM, feel like the contest is particularly uneven, like weighted a little too much in one party's favor or the other, you can slap some +1s and some minus, some modifiers on there to basically, to indicate the like unevenness of the situation. So then there's Dominion and changes. So normally by default, you start with 0 Dominion, and then your main way you're going to get Dominion is through an internal action called Build Strength, which is where you kind of, you rouse the settlement, you rouse the enclave, you get everyone working together on a project or whatever, blah, blah, blah. Like fictionally, it's the leaders of the enclave getting everyone to cooperate and help each other out and purge bad shit, blah, blah, blah. And that will increase your Dominion. Also, if the player characters do something in an adventure, that will influence the Dominion too. So, for example, if the players bring back a whole bunch of valuable resources, a fuckload of guns and ammo, or like a lot of scrap for a big project, as in, shitloads of food, that can also increase the Dominion. Generally, the Dominion gained should be about the same as the average experience points from the players would gain. So probably it's going to be, most of the time, it's going to be 3 Dominion gain from the players going on an adventure to get something. And then the main way you spend Dominion is the enact change action, internal action, where you quite literally, you spend your gained resources to try and better your settlement and some, improve the enclave in some way, build an educational system, build a farming system, build a fucking, build irrigation, like some sort of improvement. If you're trying to do something really crazy, then the cost will be, could double. If the goal is not reasonable at all, they can't do it without some sort of PC intervention, probably. And then there can be resistance to change, where you might have, there's a table here that has forces opposed to the change, so you have some sort of figurehead that doesn't want to change in that enclave for X, Y, or Z reason, and that increases the cost. For example, there's a bandit army general camped out in the enclave, and they don't want you to build a school system, so that increases the cost by 6 points. The base cost of changing things is generally equal to the power of the enclave. So if the enclave is power 3, then the cost of changing something via Dominion points will be 3, until you bring in the modifiers, of course. But as with everything else, also, if the players, take care of the problem for you, then that modifier might go away. So if there's a bandit captain or a bandit army general who really doesn't want a school system built, and the players have a chat with him, problem solved. And then you don't have to worry about that.
Yeah, we call that shotgun politics.
Yeah. So, as is always the case, player action, like you as the GM have all these mechanics to interact, and like you have your own little chess game you can play with yourself, which sounds weird, but but the player's actions always supersede it. So if they do something that should drastically change it, then yes, it happens. And in Stars Without Number and Worlds Without Number, the idea that the players are doing something so extreme to like drastically change what the faction's doing is definitely less likely, because they, if the faction that the players are interacting with is, a regional business that runs on 3 different planets, one little mission the player's doing probably isn't going to affect that much. But when we're dealing with a post-apocalypse game like this, where the enclaves are quite a bit smaller, good chance players will influence this quite a bit more. Just from a fictional standpoint, they're more likely to interact with shit like that.
Yeah, just given that the stakes are far lower, and therefore smaller actions will evoke larger changes.
Stakes are lower, and the distance between things is smaller, and the amount needed to affect the change, all that.
I would have really loved this system when I was planning the whole bandit war thing, because I would have to be like, I had like 4 citadels and like 12 guilds, and I had to constantly be like, well, okay, this one's doing this, and you have to build your own grid of these things, which is really frustrating if you don't have like a basis to set it on. And I don't know if the players had this feeling, but to me, I was like, sometimes it just feels like things are happening and I can't really tie it to any tangible mechanic. You know what I mean? Like any way that they can stop it or foresee it. It's just kind of happening. And like, of course, if they just called people every day and it's like, hey, are you getting attacked yet? Clearly they would have had an answer, but that's just not how anybody would act in the situation they were in, where they have their own shit to deal with.
Right. Yeah, I mean, part of the trick, I will say, don't assume that this system would totally solve that problem for you either, though, because part of the trick is how do you deliver the information to the players in such a way that they actually know it's relevant and are going to interact with it, you know what I mean? So
Yeah.
there is still that, but if you have the more concrete mechanics, you have something to show them a little bit more.
Exactly. That's kind of what I was getting at.
Yeah. So then we have our Enclave actions. So you have 3 internal actions, which is build strength, enact change, and restore cohesion. Build strength, like we said, that's the one how you gather Dominion up. Enact change is where you either make a new feature or fix a problem. Restore cohesion is basically regenerate your health move. And then the external actions, you have aid an ally, which is give some cash, give some help to an ally. Attack a rival, which that's pretty self-explanatory. Extend an interest, which is, embed some kind of interest in a nearby enclave, or remove an interest, which is to say, take an interest that's embedded in your enclave and get rid of it. And then there's one special one called spend interest, which basically, if you have a point of interest in a target faction, you have a couple of things that you can do, which is to say, you can steal some Dominion from them. You can help them with an action. So like if your interest in a neighboring enclave is something like a garrison and they go to attack another enclave, the one with the interest could say, yeah, we'll help with that. Our garrison will help you with that. And that can increase the roll. Or you can hinder an action, which is to say, conversely, if they attack someone and the enclave with the interest says, no, we don't want you to do that, our garrison is going to block your troops. That kind of shit. There's less actions in this game also than stars, so that makes things a little easier too. And just kind of less to jangle around.
Have I brought forth the idea of, not that I would want to do this as a GM, but I think it'd be really cool if you had a GM who was running multiple games of Ashes and each party was a different enclave.
People have proposed this, yes. So
this is kind of the level of work of the cross, the World of Darkness, cross splat book games where one person's a vampire, one person's a mage, one person's a werewolf. I'd never want to run that, but I'd love to play it.
Yeah. Before not exactly what you're talking about, but before the Cobellining.
Oh no! I thought we agreed to never use that phrase again.
You're the one who came up with it.
Yeah, I know, but you were like, no, we can't keep doing it.
Well, so before it happened, he was running Stars Without Number, where the Twitch chat was part of the Twitch chat was the factions of the game, and they would make decisions for their factions. So he would get orders from the designated faction leaders in the Discord group, and then the factions he would do out all the math based on the orders that the faction leaders gave him. So not exactly the same thing you're talking about, but a similar kind of vibe where a whole bunch of different people are interacting with the faction mechanic.
See, that's really cool though, because that introduces such a fun level of randomness into things.
Correct. Yes.
I would almost maybe if you weren't going to do the big party thing, you could almost have a situation where you have friends who are interested in your campaign, and you just give them a fucking enclave, and
give them a faction. Yeah.
Every 4 sessions, you're just like, here, y'all, I want you to pick something and just fucking do it. And especially if they know each other, they'll start acting against each other to be assholes.
Right. You're your one friend is the Ring of Fire conclave, and your other friend is the Horde of Ice, and you're like, all right, guys, here's what happened in the last couple of sessions. What do y'all want to do?
Yeah. Oh my God, that'd be so cool.
Yeah, I mean, that's certainly an option. I mean, you would only need, and you wouldn't have to do it for every faction either, right? A couple of them, you as the GM could just manage.
Yeah, well, it says you don't you shouldn't have more than 6 enclaves.
You're operating at 6, so yeah.
Yeah, give them to 3 of your friends, and then you get 3 for yourself.
Definitely doable.
Yeah.
So the process for creating an enclave, I mean, it's pretty. I don't even know that I really need to say much here, but decide, decide your basic. All right, we're gonna have an enclave here. You throw some tags on it. Like every other without number games, there's a whole shitload of tags provided that can give you all sorts of different ideas to generate. Decide what kind of power rating they have, from the 1 to 5. Give them at least one feature, potentially 2. If they're power rating 3 or more, they probably would have at least 2. Assign them some problems. Recommended to do half the action die size. So if there's a town and D8 action die, they should probably have like 4 points worth of problems. Give them Dominion points, although most enclaves are probably going to start with 0. But if for some reason you feel like they should start with a couple, then give them a couple Dominion points. And then give them interest in other enclaves. For the neighboring enclaves that they're involved with, you roll the action die, and whatever number comes up, that's how many points of interest they have to spread around, which means the interest thing starts at a random amount. And then give them a basic goal that the leadership is trying to do at the enclave, an immediate, short-term thing they're trying to do. And then there's a little section, again, explaining, basically, if the PCs do some shit that completely upends the situation, then that just happens. You don't need to obey the rules in any way. The PCs just get to do that shit. They're player characters. They get to break things. And then it gives you a couple of sample enclaves. They're basically little stat blocks for the various enclaves. If you want to sort of play around and, look at the examples and get an idea. They're very generic examples too. Like one of them is just military base turned village, doomed refugee camp, post-apocalyptic tribal village. So like they're really simple samples. So you could take them nice and easy. And then you have the big long list of enclave tags, which as you might imagine goes on for pages and pages because it's a without number game, baby. We got tables.
Oh, yeah.
So lots of enclave tags. Shocker, I'm sure. And then at the very end of all that,
personal favorite is Uplifted Beasts. It's just the Fallout 2 Village of Death Claws. You're just like,
yeah, just like weirdly, yeah, all these animals that are sentient for some reason. Yeah. And then if all of that explanation for the enclave turn didn't make no goddamn sense to you, there's an example enclave turn to walk you through it. Again, it's a without number game, so of course we have that.
Of course. How would you expect anything else?
I was expecting anything else. Then we get to the whole creating your campaign bit. Again, much like all the other, I say this with every single without number game, but we're just going to say it again for the sake of it. I'm going to go through this kind of quick because it's not necessarily something that requires a ton of yapping about, but there's a very detailed, step-by-step, lots of good information, create your own campaign system. So, I'm going to hit the high-level stuff. You start by, you establish your themes, like your tropes and your stylistic choice, blah, blah, blah. Figure out which genre you're going to do. So the 3 genre types of Ashes, your Mutant, your Deadlands, or your After the Fall. Figure out what kind of campaign structure you're going to do, which is to say, is it going to be focused more around like survival or more around exploration? Exploration? Yes. More around exploration, because that's a really hard word. It's fine. Design your region to play in, obviously. Stock up your region with crises and encounter sites, and then figure out your initial adventure. Your initial adventure, as is always the case, it's recommended, should be really simple, straightforward, and should only take the players like a session at most. Maybe a session and a half if you lag behind a little bit, but the initial adventure should be simple and straightforward, just to like get their feet wet, get the point across, and get them into the flow of the mechanics and shit. Then there's a big thing on things to think about, like problems that might arise. The one thing I do want to mention with this one is there's a section that says, is there a victory state? Which I think is a really interesting point, because I think people have a tendency to jump into campaigns often where they just kind of start running and don't know if there's like a decided endpoint really. So the idea of pre-establishing to yourself, is there a victory state? Is there a final achievable goal? I feel like is a good thing to keep in mind. Just glad the book brought it up, I guess is what I'm saying.
It is something that like, I mean, like let's take me for example. Every game I've run, I've had an end state like in mind. But it is a situation where you kind of lose track of that, right? Like you're so focused on the current thing they're doing, or you've given one arc way more attention that you originally wanted, and now your end state is not what it was originally. Like keeping that in mind kind of at all times is probably good advice.
I mean, that's
maybe not at all times, but you know what I mean.
Maybe, yeah, all times, but keeping it in the back of your brain actively, I think, is relevant. Yeah. And then it goes through a bunch of campaign themes, which is to say the kind of themes that will come up in a post-apocalypse style of game. Themes being like death, despair, exile, fragility, hope, hunger, ignorance, paralysis, privation. Basically just going through like what kind of themes, what kind of issues usually come up in the style of game, and how much do you want to utilize them. It also talks about in each of the theme sections how likely or like how much of each theme should come up based on the type of campaign you're doing, because they will come up, in varying degrees in the different kinds of campaigns. And then it talks a bit more about the genres, which is to say the Mutant Wastelands, the Deadlands, and the After the Fall, and just gives you some advice on what mechanics to use for which one, so on and so forth. And then the idea of structuring your campaign, which is to say, is your campaign structured around crisis, which is like the PCs are constantly running into problems and constantly have to resolve said problems. For example, if you're doing an After the Fall campaign, good chance you're doing the crisis thing where every couple of sessions, a new problem happens because, the apocalypse is happening right the fuck now. Versus building a proactive exploration campaign, which is the idea that, the main crisis is past. We're in kind of a somewhat stable state. And the PCs are traveling around, exploring the world, looking for resources, looking for allies, looking for stuff. And just, be clear which of these two tell your players which of these two you're generally leaning towards. Obviously, you'll probably ebb and flow between them a little bit from time to time, but like, which lane are you generally riding in? And then it explains how to, like, the step-by-step of how to set up the crisis versus the exploration campaigns. Basically, how to go from that, like, make the region and pick the locations, everything, put them on the adventure. What do you do after the adventure? How do you keep the ball rolling? And it just goes through like a 11 step, I think it's a 10-step process for the two of them. 11 for the first one, 9 for the other. Just a process of, how to go through it. Again, there's a lot of guidance. That's the idea behind the Without Numbers games, is GM guidance. That's why they were these games were literally created because the designer was annoyed how many games out there in the wild just kind of leave their GM high and dry. Which entirely valid, completely valid point. Yep. Isaiah says, looking over at Lancer, being like, Kind of, at least a little bit. At least a little bit.
More than a little bit, yeah. Like, I really wish Lancer came with something for like the faction / enclaves, just some way of keeping track of shit that's going on different planets. Because the game is going for kind of like a Lancer, not a Lancer, like an Armored Core, like these corporations are doing their own machinating and then the planets are doing their own thing. And like, you're not going to drive meaningful change because you're just one pilot, but like you do got to keep track of what all the mega powers are doing. Or maybe you don't have to, but like, I feel like the intent is to keep track of those things. So yeah, I do wish those were there. And I really wish that I as the GM had more information and more sort of control on how to not generally control the campaign, but how to like lean things in one direction or the other, you know?
Yeah, some sort of mechanical guidance on what that flow should look like.
Would have been nice.
Fair enough. So then we get into that's the creating your campaign bit, and then you have the creating your region bit, where it gives you advice on first how to set up your map, you know, your addition, and it gets quite specific. It tells you what size paper to use, and like this book assumes you're doing everything still at the table, paper and pencil style. What size paper to use, how many hexes you want. Like it recommends doing a 20 or what is it? Where I just saw it. Roughly 20 by 30 hex grid. And then once you have your map kind of laid out and everything and ready to roll, then you want to start placing your enclaves. For After a Fall in a Deadlands campaign, it mentions that stable enclaves may or may not be a thing yet, really, because the collapse happened very recently. Whereas if you're dealing with the Mutant Wasteland campaign, which is a little further in the future, good chance that there are established enclaves all over the place doing their own thing, making their own plans. And then it gives some advice on how to think about placing the enclaves, such as putting them near fresh sources of water and like putting them in areas that make sense to be habitable, right? A base in the literal smack dab middle of the desert with nothing around it probably doesn't make sense unless there's some sort of weird justification for why it does. Then it talks about placing major ruins, which is ruins kind of act like your dungeons in a game like this. You know, they're large relevant areas that are not enclaves but can be explored or interacted with in some capacity, where like a fight might happen or some kind of event might happen. Again, for After the Fall in a Deadlands campaign, ruins might not be a thing in the same sense, but you probably would make like city zones, for example, would probably make sense. If you think about something like Left 4 Dead, right? You go through major like city zones. In the Mutant Wasteland campaign, they probably will be big ass ruins of lost places. Then you want to decide on the starting location where the PCs will start. The game recommends putting them towards the center of the map so that all the other crap is roughly equidistant from them, so they can choose to go in kind of whatever direction they want. And then you're also going to make encounter sites, which can be, again, kind of like dungeons. Also, like ruins and encounter sites, they both kind of act like a sort of dungeon-y concept, but like the ruins are probably going to be larger, big places, and then the encounter sites might be smaller, a little more focused, but basically spots on the map where like shit's going to go down in some capacity. And it recommends having 2 encounter sites ready to go at all times, as like basically you want to prep 2 encounter sites that you don't decide where they are on the map, and then if the PCs go in a direction randomly, you can just plop the encounter site down in front of them and go, ah, look, you found this thing, even if you weren't initially planning for it to be there. And once you have done, it says, once you've done that, make another one so that you always have 2 in your back pocket ready to go. You could do more than 2, obviously, but 2 generally is probably going to be enough, which having GM for a while, yeah, 2 is probably going to be enough. Then it gives some advice on obviously making travel encounters, which are going to be kind of a big thing in a game like this, right? Traveling around, meeting random people or random enemies or fucking raiders or monsters and mutants or some shit. You know, we're zombies in the case of the zombie stuff. And, you know, it recommends creating random tables of 6 to 10 encounters, although not all the encounters have to be bad. And then you want to create your intro adventure, which I don't think I need to explain to anyone how that works. Make an intro adventure like any other fucking game.
Yeah.
And then you have there's a page on building crises. That's a word. Crises. I don't like that word. It's never easy to say.
Yeah, because you want to say crises, but it's not actually not how you pronounce
crises.
it.
Yeah. Brain.
Crises.
Crises. I think it's one of those both are correct situations. Basically, this one more applies to a after the fall or Deadlands situation. It's just what kind of bad shit happened to cause the collapse to occur. There's a table. There's a couple of like various examples describing how this particular thing might cause a collapse to happen, like communications, food, law enforcement, medical, power, sewage, waste, transport, water. It's pretty much advice on, it's basically saying, think about how the bad shit happened. You know. And then for each type of crisis, it gives you a dedicated page or like a dedicated section for each of them. So like communication, what went wrong with the communications? Food, what went wrong with the food? Law enforcement, what went wrong with the law enforcement? So on and so forth. You might use the crisis thing for a mutant wasteland campaign if you just want to think about like how far back the past go. You know, if you want to think further back into the past like that. I kind of like, maybe this is a me thing, but I kind of like it when the post-apocalypse setting, the apocalypse is just like, we don't know what happened. It's a mystery.
Yeah, I in my game, it started off that way, and like the big like, you know, beginning of the final arc reveal was like not necessarily how, but what happened. You know what I mean?
Right.
So yeah, no, I'm with you there.
And then you get building encounter sites, which again, you know, basically populating your hex map with interesting sites that the players can run into and be like, oh shit just went down, you know, or something's happening, blah blah blah. Again, as is always the case, you know, the game recommends building 2 encounter sites. And this game is constantly reiterating you only ever need to prep for the next session, right? So you don't need a bazillion jillion encounter sites to try and cover every possible scenario, right? It says make 2, plot them in front of the players as needed. You only need shit for the next session. So it's constantly trying to say, you know, you have to prep a lot of shit. So only prep your immediate needs. It literally, actually, I'll read this one little bit. It can be tempting for an ambitious GM to decide to prep their entire hex map, hand placing suitable sites all over the region. Given a 1/3 encounter density at 644 hexes in a 23 by 28 hex map. However, that can be a prohibitively vast undertaking to accomplish at once, even with the tools in this section. Instead, focus only on the chunk of the map that the PCs might explore during the next session. And then then you might say like, okay, how do I know where the PCs are going to explore? And this game will tell you multiple times over and over and over again. At the end of the session, ask them where they plan to go next. And if they say we plan to go north, then you prep the hexes up north. That's how you do it.
I say this as the nicest call out. I don't think my players would be able to give me an answer 90% of the time, and that causes me stress.
All right, well, then they're not playing the goddamn game.
Nope.
Here's the thing. That's the ultimatum. Either you tell me what the plan for the next session is, or there ain't no game next week. Right? Like, that's the only way to do it.
Ultimatum to make.
That's the only way to do it. Right? If you want to do the sandbox thing, that's kind of what you have to do. Like, there's not really. The only other alternative is to populate the entire map, and like we were just saying, LOL, Lamau.
Ridiculous amount of work, yeah.
There's also a couple of it gives you 3 different recommended ways that you can stock your map with sites, with encounter sites, and it says, you're probably going to mix and match between these. The methods being create some pre-made encounter sites, and when the PCs scout things out, plop it down there, it says create 4 or 5 encounter sites. Or for each hex you're stocking during a prep session, roll a d6. If it's a 1 or 2, create an encounter site there. This is more prep work, obviously, but you can tailor the site more to the area it's in. Or you can look at the hex map and put encounter sites only in the hexes where you think something should be, filling roughly a third. This method guarantees you won't have dead zones of randomly generated emptiness, but it could also be a bit predictable. So, mix and match your methodologies there. Then it elaborates on how do you make the site itself, which ultimately, it's funny because it says get out a 3x5 index card. Just thought it was really funny that it specified index cards. I was like, oh, okay. Figure out the basic features of the site, main building and structures and natural features, and write that down. Roll or choose 2 special descriptors from the table on page 173. What a surprise. Tables. Which will help you to flavor the site. Decide on 3 or 4 characteristic locations for the feature and sketch a layout of it on the front of the card. For example, a ruined car dealership might have a parking lot, a showroom, a mechanic garage, and an office. Determine who's at the site, the occupants, see what their deal is. Try to tie them into a nearby enclave in some fashion. Distribute any occupants among the site's location and give a 1-sentence note on what they're doing when the PCs first run into them. Figure out the loot tables for the site, what's actually worth taking there. And then use the twist and hazards table to add some extra flavor, traps, or perils into the place. And then, you got your site up and rolling. And then, of course, encounter site tags.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, you bet your bippy.
And there's
a lot more tags.
I just looking through these,
yeah.
I have used almost all of them in Hellscapes, which is wild.
I mean, yeah.
I just wasn't expecting, I was like, oh, abandoned traps, okay, ancient lore, okay, autonomous base, okay, baited trap, okay, beacon fire, beastman lair, okay, the berserk robots, okay. It just kept going where I was like, oh, wait. This would have been so useful.
I mean, you did run that game for 4 years. So.
I did run it for 4 years. And when, what the setting type was, the answer was kind of yes on purpose.
Yes,
I wanted my cake and ate it too.
You did kitchen sink it a little bit, yeah.
Yeah. Regret nothing. But once again, just take another shot.
Shots abound. Then, of course, we have the one roll pages, the one roll whatever roll pages. So in this case, one roll encounter site passed, which is where you have a whole bunch of tables and you just roll a singular die on each of the tables to answer various questions. These one roll tables are all over the game and are all over the other Without Number games. And then a big fucking table for features, like I was saying. And then a big table for the occupants and a descriptor for the various types of occupants. And then more tables for one roll occupant details. And then we have one roll occupant leadership. More tables. Tables.
There's so many tables.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like I'm skipping over things, but there are literally pages of tables. So, And I'm not going to read every entry on a fucking table, that's for sure.
No, it's when I was trying to read this book in preparation for today, I was like, oh my god, it's still another 200 pay. Oh wait, these are all tables. Okay.
And then you realize how many tables there are?
Yeah, and I was like, oh wait, actually, not so bad.
It's actually a lot less pages than I thought, yeah. That's true of all the without number books. You look at the page count and you're like, whoo, and then you look at how many tables there are and you're like, oh, I see. And there's also just a lot of stuff you could skip over if you're not particularly using it, you know?
True. They did the funny thing where they packed so much necessary text in a few amount of pages, and it like all the tables just make up for it. Like,
yeah. And then there's encounter site hazards. So this is basically like traps, essentially. Like you'd have traps in a dungeon. This is kind of the encounter site hazards. There's two types of encounter site hazards. There's environmental hazards and occupant hazards. Environmental hazards being pretty much what they sound like, something that makes the environment more of a danger. And then the occupant hazards are basically some kind of trap set up by occupants to make like an ambush or something like that easier. So like an occupant hazard, for example, is they desperately need a particular kind of supply and are willing to take risks to get it. So like, that's not what, let me find one better example. They've blocked up most of the entrances to force invaders to pass through a checkpoint, right? So like somebody occupied this place and set up a situation where you have to go through a specific checkpoint, and like, that's going to be a hazard because you walk through the choke point and then they shoot the shit out of you. You can, of course, roll on a table to determine how many hazards, or just pick yourself, and then you can pick from the table of hazards to decide what it is, or you can roll, because that's how these games always work, and then jot down the hazard. And then you have the encounter tables themselves, which I don't think I need to explain. They work like encounter tables in D&D. Big table, put stuff on there, roll on table. Bang, boom, bang. Not all the encounters need to be bad or anything like that. They can be nice if you want to be nice, or they can all be bad. Some of them can be really fucking brutal, and some of them can be really easy. That's kind of the point of the sandbox style of game, is the encounters. Anytime you're designing encounter sites and encounter tables, it doesn't need to be a fair fight for the players. It just needs to make sense for the place they're in. So if the players are in a shopping mall, it doesn't make sense for them to run into like military assassin robots. Probably would be a little extreme. But to run into some random guys looting some shit with pistols on them, yeah, that's fine. And if it's only 3 guys, are the players gonna just kill them immediately and no problem? Yeah, probably. But like, that's kind of the point.
Which one is a particular favorite of mine? An old shotgun rigged to fire when a door is opened. Evasion save or take 3d4 shotgun hit.
Yeah.
Ooh. Oh.
Fucking ow. Yeah.
If you're doing the glass PCs things, Jimmy's fucking dead.
Yeah, good chance. So yeah, that's and there's a couple of sample encounter tables that are broken up based on the 3 campaign types also. And then you have one roll traveling survivor groups, which is to say like people wandering around. And then you gotta decide how to place the loot. My least favorite thing to do in every RPG is deal with loot.
I like loot.
I don't, it's fun to get as a player. I don't want to have to deal with it as a GM.
But it doesn't, like, when you see the loot tables, it doesn't like, I don't know, it doesn't like kind of excite you to be like, oh, I could give them that. I could give them that. I could give them that.
No, it just kind of stresses me out. Yeah.
See.
Okay. Yeah, I don't know. That's just how I roll. I don't know what you want from me.
I just don't know why you hate fun.
I do. I hate fun. It's true. So, basically, the book is like, if you think an encounter site is important enough to require custom loot, then just, come up with the custom loot table yourself. If not, just make a whole bunch of pre-made loot cards and just slap those cards into a site whenever you need them. Oh, the players looted the thing. Go through your loot cards. Here you go. It's funny. The game actually recommends making the loot cards, and then if the players loot an area, literally hand them the stack of cards and have them pull from the card deck randomly.
Oh, that's fun.
Yeah, so a little bit of a tactile, like literally pulling a loot card. But yeah, basically, don't design custom loot for everything because it's not worth it and your sanity will slip quickly. There's various types of site loot that you could potentially get. Obviously, there's ammo, clothing, food, fuel, gear, materials, wares, weapons. And then there's special loot, which is to say like the sci-fi shit like TL4 scrap and special mod components and shit. Pick the loot type that makes sense, obviously, go from there. There's also, as you might imagine, there's tables for this. Shocker, I know.
I couldn't have believed it unless I seen it with my own eyes.
Yeah, I know. So you find a given site, find the closest match on the table. So like, for example, apartment, a high-rise studio is a good match for like an apartment, right? Determine whether or not there's a large cache of resources in the area, and then it gives you some like percentage odds if there should be a large cache or not. If there is a large cache, you roll a d20 for the loot types in the entry. If the d20 goes over a certain number on the table, then that means there is additional loot there. So like, for example, in an apartment, if you roll a 19 plus, there's 1d6 more random loot. If there's a large cache at said apartment. Each result is 1 encumbrance worth of that type of loot. So if it says 1d6 of materials, that means the hardware store has 1d6 encumbrance of useful materials. On an 11 plus on the d20, it would have 1d6 more encumbrance as well. If the cache is of any type, roll on the matching tables on the following page to see what sort of goods it is. More tables to roll on. Once you figured out once you have the large cache, you then repeat that process for the individual items. This represents the bits and bobs laying around. And then lastly, if the site has any occupants, you can roll for the occupant loot. So if the players take out some random guys that are there, you can have a loot card for what they have on them. Which, it probably sounds slightly confusing to me explain it, but when you see the table and see it in the book, it's not that confusing. And then the various kinds of loot that you can get are then further explained on the subsequent pages, such as perishable versus preserved food versus clothing versus fuel versus gear versus, ammo and yada, yada, yada. Gear gets a little bit of an extra entry because gear can kind of mean anything. So it's a little further descriptor on how you should put gear type loot in a encounter site. And then we get to adventure design. So, it recommends, like I said before, recommends you start with a basic introductory adventure, which you don't want to make overly complicated. Your 3 general types of adventures are going to be crisis, exploration, or social adventures. Obviously, these aren't like hard and fast categories. They're kind of loose descriptors. Gives you some steps for making said introductory adventure. I don't think I really need to go through that. It's probably what you're used to if you've heard anyone talk about how to do this kind of stuff. There is a points to remember page, which is to say some like GM pointers, such as don't build more than 1 session worth of play at a time. This book says that so many, it reiterates
it
that
does reiterate it a lot.
So many times, which I think really says something about how he feels like people design this kind, like how he feels like people run these games and how he's basically like, y'all motherfuckers do this wrong. Because, yeah, constantly reiterate. And I'm okay with the reiterating. I just think it's kind of funny.
No, I mean, I think it does reinforce the point of like, you're probably overthinking it.
Yeah.
I mean, one of the things that I really appreciate about the game is it says you have to do efficient prep. Like,
Yes.
don't prep things you don't need because otherwise the game's just prep load. It falls
Balloons
completely out of control. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I like that because I'm one of those people where I get like paralysis on prepping and then I don't want to prep anything. And then I just like, you know, I'm like crazily writing shit down an hour before session because I got to figure some shit out, you know? And I'm better
Sounds
now that
about
I'm
right.
doing Lancer, but it still is a problem.
Yeah. Another point that I really like that this book mentions is make problems, not solutions. As someone who says that a lot, yeah. Right? Like, it's not your job as the GM to plan out how the PCs are going to resolve a particular crisis. It's your job to give them interesting problems, one that the PCs will care about and want to get involved in. Agreed. And then, you know, a classic advice, which is NPCs are people too, which is to say, don't play the NPCs like just mindless violence robots, right? They are people with like drives and objectives.
To that point, in the adventure area, something I really like is it tells you the mood of a place. Just like what, like when you go and you do with like, you know, what is it? Like Bandit Camp's mood is like, where was it? Oh no, my point. It's dying. I lost the page.
I don't know which page are you referring to?
I don't remember. Oh, here we go. Like Survivor Camp Courts. What's the general mood? Well-stocked numbness at their new life. Shell-shocked numbness at their new life. Crushing despair.
Which page are you looking at?
195. For the different kind of adventures.
Or 190. 195 and 194 are say exploration adventures.
Or apologies, 198.
I was like, sir, what? Oh yes, the different like courts, the different groups, yeah, the different kind of groups you could potentially run into, yeah. This is kind of like the one roll tables, yeah. It's like tables of stuff that you can roll up to sort of generate ideas for what the fuck is their deal kind of energy. So yes, and then in the creating adventures after the points to remember, you then have the crisis, exploration, and social adventures where it breaks down how to design each version, each kind of adventure. And then it gives you a table to help you. First, it gives you a table on what the template is. So, for example, an enemy is exploiting a complication in order to get a valuable thing is like the base template. And then there's another table to add template conjunctions that make the situation more complicated, that add an and, but, or, because, or despite. And then those qualifiers add more bullshit into the situation. And it does that for each of the each crisis, exploration, and social. It kind of throws in, you have that kind of starting template design, you have that complication design, and it gives you steps on how to go through and make a full adventure from back to front. And then the courts that I say, courts feels like a real weird word, but yeah, basically just the kinds of groups. So like village courts, which is to say a small post-apocalyptic village of locals you run into. And then it has the stuff Isaiah was talking about, or tables of like, what's holding this place together, for example, is what it says for the village courts. And then people of the village, and then the problems the village has. And then you might say, okay, cool. What about the rewards? What do I get? What's the loot?
Tables. Get tables. That's what you get.
You
get fucking tables. More tables.
But in terms of rewards, so the XP system is basically just, if the PCs accomplish their goal, they receive 3 XP for accomplishing their goal. This is basically a quest XP system, which is fine. Cool with that. If they get a partial success, they get 2 XP. If they fail but just barely survive, they get 1 XP, even though they didn't achieve anything, which I'm okay with. And then obviously you want to give them the loot rewards that you've already figured out from the loot table stuff. Alternate XP options are, so there's milestone rewards, which is basically just you give them XP for like a big goal that you as the GM decide. Honestly, this is not really that different to the baseline reward system, so I don't know why it breaks it out as like 2 separate things, but okay, I guess. Because the milestone doesn't give them a level or anything, it still gives them XP. It's just you get XP based on the goal that the GM kind of determined, as opposed to the players determined. And then there's the desperation reward system, which this one's crazy to me. If a player character dies, everyone gets 3 XP. If a player character gets mortally wounded or a close ally dies or an important community faces a crisis, the players get 2 XP. This XP is given even if the community is destroyed. So basically bad shit happens and you get XP. I don't know that I would ever do that. I don't really like that idea. I know why. I get why he's doing it. You know, the idea of emulating the idea, as it says, this reward model emulates the gradual hardening of the apocalyptic survivors, where only terrible traumas and awful events bring forth heroes. I get that. I don't know.
Yeah, don't love it.
Don't love it. And then there's the plundering rewards XP system, which is pretty much you get 3 XP for a session in which you retrieve valuable resources for your community that make a difference in some capacity. You know, you plundered. Pretty straightforward. And then there's a breakdown of how the players should be rewarded. Technically, the game says you cash, like money is not necessarily a thing, but if you want to have like a general baseline to gauge money by, here's how you would gauge it. And you base the rewards on the patron who is asking for the job. So if a hardened survivor, as the game puts it, asks you to do a job, the baseline reward is 100 cash. Then there's a table of modifiers that apply, such as, for example, the job takes a rare specialist to handle the task, and the job, it might be expected to take about a week. Those 2 things would add a +1 to the difficulty of the, add a +1 modifier to the quote unquote difficulty. And that would bring it up to a +2, and then you then modify the base pay by whatever the modifiers total up to. So if it was a +2, you would take the base pay and multiply it by 2. So basically you start with who's paying for the job, that's where the money starts, and then how difficult is the job, that increases the pay based on various modifiers from a few tables. The players can also be rewarded in favors, weapons, relics, or items. And there's a table that has the various types of patrons, and next to the cash reward, there is also the other types of rewards they could potentially get. So the hardened survivor could give them the 100 base cash, or 1 favor, 1 weapon, or 1 item. So if you don't want to go straight for the money, you can also split it between money and the items. And yeah, that's all the adventure stuff. And then we get into
something I'd like to put at the end of that. I feel like this, more than anything, like if you're a GM, I think you need to make it very clear to your players that this is the kind of onus that's on them. Like, like the patron will give you what you want. And yes, the game is sandboxy. It's sort of player-led in the first place, but like the players need goals. They need to know what they want, like specifically. You're going to the hardened survivor because you need food, because you need water, because you need medicine.
I mean, yeah. Generally, it doesn't necessarily like the patron could come to them cash, also,
but like,
I'm saying the patron could come to them and also offer too, but you're still, you as the GM in the background are still doing the same process.
Yes, I still think even if the patron does come to you or come to the players, I think it puts a lot of responsibility on them. So if you're kind of like, well, I don't know what, like, I'm giving them favors, I'm giving this, they're not using it. It's the players just kind of need to know what they want, which again, part of the game. And I don't know, this might seem,
I mean, if you're just talking about the onus of the players need to be driven to do their own shit, yeah, the whole game basically operates on that assumption.
Yes, it does, but I feel like a reward system requires a little extra special attention because this is the thing that the players are playing for.
Sometimes, I mean, depending on the situation, they could also be playing for they could also be playing to like fix problems in their enclave and shit too, which would then be a slightly different reward structure situation.
Well, sort of, but like, if you do like the Fallout situation, the water chip, like you're trying to find the water chip for your village. And I guess this one kind of subverts my point because that's a campaign goal, not a player or like personal goal, but still, I think the idea is like you need players who know what they want.
I mean, yes, I don't think though that this particular patron reward and payment thing though is only works in that scenario. Like, it can work in either direction. Right? Like,
I am thinking, sorry, like, yes, it can work. I don't know. I almost feel like I'm bringing this up at a personal experience, like I'm
confused what you're trying to say. I'll be honest. I don't know what you're getting at exactly here.
Well, so Lancer does this too, right? Where you usually you don't pay for your level ups, you get reserves for your level ups. But it can feel like, okay, I have to figure out how I got to pay these guys because we're not doing the money structure thing. This is one of the reasons why I went for the money structure thing. And it can feel a little taxing to be like, oh, we have to come up with like things that they might want or need, when it's just better if make it clear that like players, you kind of need to know what you want and or need.
Well, this page is kind of saying you as the GM are deciding what you're giving them.
It's not how I interpret it.
I mean,
I fully admit this could be like an Isaiah-ism where I'm thinking about this a little too hard, but like,
well, I think you're just bringing this up in the wrong section. Like, if you were talking about how the loot and looting like encounter sites and stuff works, that I could understand, but this particular bit is talking about like a traditional quest giver type situation.
I don't know, it just felt more pertinent here, especially when they talk about having like giving out favors. Because I've given out favors before, right? Favors feel a little useless unless the players like are actively trying to chip them in.
Well, I mean, sure, if you're talking about just the favors specifically.
No, not just the favors, but like it's a big one. Like if like favors are like an abstract loot.
I guess, again, this just doesn't feel like this. I'm slightly confused why you're bringing it up now. This section specifically says. Well, so like at the top here, it says there are times when the PCs will be working for a patron and the GM needs to decide how much a given employer is willing to pay for a specific job.
Right. Yeah. And I get that. I do. I still like even reading it. I went right, but they are going to need to know what they want. Like, yeah, sure, you might be willing to give guns, but I don't know. Move on. It seemed important to me. It seemed like something I felt like, oh, this is something I experienced. And it felt more relevant here than in the sites thing, because the mention of favors made me feel like there was sort of an abstraction to the loot in question.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're locking maybe a little too much on the favors one specifically, but it is true that the game expects if you're doing an exploration campaign, yes, it is generally expected that the players are going to be more self-motivated in how they're picking where they're going, because it's assuming that they know what they want and or need, and then they're going to decide what direction to head in because they have this big sandbox to head in any direction they want. In the same way like an open world game situation. So like, yes, the game does expect the players to do that. And actually, I forget where it brings it up, but it does specifically bring up the idea of if you have players that aren't willing to do that, here's how you can deal with that potential issue. It does talk about it somewhere. I can't remember where. I think it's somewhere in the creating adventures. It might even be the exploration adventures bit. For these adventures, to create. I can't remember, but like, yes, the game talks about the problem of having players who are not motivated enough to go out and find their own goals. That's going to be something to contend with.
I don't know. I wasn't trying to derail it. It felt pertinent to me to chime in there, not the sites thing, because.
Well, you get what I'm saying, though, right?
No,
like
I do.
I just felt like exploring the sites, looking for the loot to find things that you need to bring back to your home base.
Yes.
Right, like, oh, we need water and food, so go out and find some like perishable food items and bring home or whatever.
Yes, this felt like an extension of that, I guess, which is why I put it here, because it is the final part before you get into like combat and counter stuff. But also, I think the mention of favors made me feel like, oh, right, this is something that, like, you need to know what you want if you're going to try to, like, I'll do it for a favor, or someone's like, oh, you need this thing, I'll do you a favor.
Right, but I think you're flipping it slightly, because this particular section is assuming that the patron is offering a favor to the players, not that they're asking for a favor.
Fair enough.
You know what I mean?
Yes, I suppose. We can move on. I just like it.
Then we get into basically the bestiary, the creatures section. It's the bestiary bit. It's what you'd expect. It starts off kind of talking about the combat in the various like subgenres, the After the Fall, the Deadlands, and the Mutant Wasteland campaign, and how you want to think about the combat. So like, for example, in the After the Fall game, which is sort of normal people thrust into bad situation, you're going to have way less combat. Combat's going to be really fucking traumatic when it does happen. You're going to have a much smaller pool of enemy types because you're dealing with probably just mostly normal ass humans who have acquired some guns or some weapons or whatever. And then the Deadlands campaign, obviously combat's going to happen because zombies, but zombies are almost more like an environmental problem than a straight up fighting thing. And there will be some fights that merit, full attention in the Deadlands campaigns, but less. And then the Mutant Wasteland one is going to be your most classical, closest to your kind of D&D travel around and like fuck bitches, get money, kill monsters type energy. Because you're plumbing the depths of weird, mysterious ruins or ancient labs or whatever. There's a page on judging combat, which is basically how you do your CR calculations. I feel like this is boring to talk about, so like I'm not going to get into it, but basically you do some math based on the monster, the enemy's hit dice and their hit dice and their attack die, I think it is. Or no, what is it? Hit dice and how many attacks they have per round. You do some math based on that. You do some math to figure out the sort of combat power of the PCs, compare the two numbers.
I'd really like to see how this checks out. Like, being the CR system of the game, I want to see how far that can get stress tested.
I mean, I don't remember having a problem with it in Stars Without Number, but it's been a while, so I could be wrong. But also worth pointing out that you're not designing combat to be you're not designing encounters to be on level with PCs, right? You're designing encounters based on where they are and what makes sense. So you're probably, you don't need to stress it. It's not going to feel like it needs to be stress tested in the same way because you're not balancing every single encounter or most of the encounters.
No, of course not. I'm not necessarily saying it for balance, but like a situation where I'm not necessarily sure how it would happen. But it says here, if the enemy is about equal or smaller, will likely win without taking any casualties. I'm curious to see if there's a situation with that where the number is about equal, if not a little smaller.
How true is that statement?
Yeah.
Sure.
Like I said, balance sort of notwithstanding, I just want to see how well each category actually functions.
Fair enough. It also mentions in this section, do not build unavoidable fights in this game because the game kind of assumes that they can get out of situations because they might end up in bad situations and they need to be able to have an out. And if you just put them in unavoidable fight after unavoidable fight, they are not 5e characters. They will just die horribly eventually. Then you have reaction rolls, which are basically just when the players run into a character, you roll 2d6 and consult the table to see if they react really negatively or really positively when they first meet the player characters. Within reason, that makes sense. If the player characters run into a slobbering, violent, giant mutant hell beast out in the middle of the wasteland, and you roll a 12 plus, which the result is as friendly and helpful as is plausible, obviously the giant mutant beast is not going to roll over and suddenly become a puppy, but that just means that the giant mutant beast maybe already ate and is a little sleepy, so it doesn't try to immediately kill them on sight. Right? That's what a friendly roll for that kind of thing would mean. And then if for some reason you are unsure how to read that reaction roll, like you get a result and you're like, how do I interpret this? There is another set of tables that you could roll on or pick from that sort of give you a couple of reasons to justify it, such as they don't want trouble right now. The PCs somehow solved a recent problem for them. They're prejudiced in favor of the PCs. Maybe they meet the slobbering beast and for some reason the players smell like an animal or something that thing really doesn't like eating. So it just kind of like sniffs them and turns and walks away. And then we have morale checks, which morale checks are still in the game. Basically, you make morale checks periodically through a fight when various conditions have been met. If the enemy passes the morale check, they stay in fight. If the enemy fails the morale check, they try to flee or they try to surrender or they try to negotiate or whatever. It kind of depends on the situation. You as the GM are expected to follow like common sense and logic for how the morale check should flow. And you make checks when one of the first ally to go down on the enemy side, you make a morale check. If more of half their allies go down, make a morale check. If it seems like they are likely to lose to the players, morale check. If some sort of dramatic reversal happens in the situation, some sort of shocking loss, or like the player characters whip out a huge fucking weapon and they're like, oh shit, another morale check. The main point of the morale checks is to give the players the ability to overcome a combat without having to kill everyone. Like, kill one or two guys, morale check, oh shit, okay, you win. That's kind of the intended effect there, because every fight is not, in fact, most fights are not supposed to be a fight to the last man, because that wouldn't really make sense given the setting and the scenario and stuff. And also just players aren't that durable, and also combat will get boring if you do that all the time. Like on a meta game design level, the way that combat works in the without number games, that will start to get boring if you just if you try to 5e, just hammer them constantly, fight down to the last man type of shit.
Well, so actually I got a question. In an interesting reverse, you are more likely than pretty much every other GM I've ever had to have enemies just go fuck it and be like, we're done. You think that's because of these games?
Oh, what you mean that I've actively done it in my game?
Yeah, like your enemy NPCs have a far higher surrender rate than pretty much everyone I've ever played for. Which, that's a good thing.
I don't remember. It might have been from Running Stars. I don't honestly remember. I don't know where I picked up that. Like, I don't know. I feel like that's one of those GM advice things I heard in the days of yore and just kind of stuck with it a lot. Honestly, the main reason to do it too is just because when you get down to the point of like, there's 2 guys left. What's even if there's 4 players and 2 enemies, it's a foregone conclusion anyway. Why are we playing it out? There are certain situations where playing it out can be worth it, but most of the time it's not. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah.
So, yeah, I don't necessarily remember. I think that's just a thing I heard one time and then rolled with it, to be honest. And then we get the page on how to read stat lines. I'm not going to explain how to read the stat lines. It's not that exciting. It's also not any different from the other games. And then we get a bunch of examples, enemy stuff, example NPC stat lines. Starting with just normal ass animals: alligator, bear, buffalo, elephant, horse, mule, shark. Shark is kind of a funny one. Just normal ass animals you start with. A couple of the normal animals have a little special thing to them. For example, an alligator gets a +2 to hit and damage rolls if the thing it's attacking is in waist deep water. But for the most part, the animals are just like basic stat lines. Then you have the beast folk, which are big animal people. The game mentions that the beast folk are coming from the preset setting of the game, which is called the Albuquerque Dead Zone, or Death Zone, the Albuquerque Death Zone. The beast folk technically are justified in that setting, but obviously the idea of beast folk applies to all sorts of weird post-apocalyptic settings. So, and they can vary all the way from bipedal, mostly human, big dog man down to mostly dog thing with a human brain. So there's a wide swath of the kind of beast folk. And then if your players want to be beast folk, they can take any of the beast folk origin foci, and then picking that focus at level 1 turns you into that kind of beast folk. So if you want to be a goat person, you take the goat folk origin focus. Bada bing, bada boom, you're a weird goat person. Or a turtlekin, for example. You want to play a fucking...
oh, sick. I want to play Turtle Man.
Why can't I think of what they're called in D&D now?
Turtle.
Yeah, you want to be a little turtle? Or a rat folk? I like the rat folk.
They remind me of Skaven, so yes, they are great.
Yeah. Also, the beast folk stat blocks. I say stat blocks, they're stat lines. The beast folk stat lines, if they are of that beast folk type, they get the origin ability from that beast folk generally. So they do have, each of them will generally have like a special ability. Then you get some more 1-roll beast folk pack generator tables to figure out, what's the pack deal? Then we have cyborgs. I think everybody knows what a cyborg is, so I don't know that I need to explain that much. But there's a bunch of different weird cybernetic semi-human enemies you can deal with, like a cyber corpse or a ripper dog of the name Ripper Dog. Springblade or an iron cultist, which is a cyber enhanced servant of the Iron General, given enough tech to smite the fleshies under the direction of their robotic masters.
The fleshies is crazy.
I feel like that must be a Fallout reference. It feels like a Fallout reference.
Oh, to me that was an AdMech thing. That's what I was thinking.
I would say that. I don't think that the designer is into 40K. That seems unlikely to me. Not
you think so? I don't know. I feel like 40K is pretty mainstream now.
No, it's really not.
I don't know.
Also, this is the guy who makes these games is an old man. Bro's like mid-60s, I think.
I don't know, man. If he's into OSR, I feel like old fucking rogue trader and like.
I mean, it's possible, but I doubt it. Also, you just assume everything is Warhammer.
Warhammer's a lot. Like, not Warhammer might not be Dune, but Warhammer is a lot of places.
And then also under the cyborgs, you have a whole shitload of cyborg special abilities that you can slap on to your various orgs. There's a weird thing he did with the stat lines where he marked the hit dice with an asterisk, and every asterisk is an ability for that NPC. I don't know why he did it with an asterisk. Those are hard to count. Like, just visually, when you look at a line of asterisks, that's just hard to count. I don't know why you did it that way. Why didn't you just put a number?
That's a little.
Thought that was an odd choice, but here we are. But yes, there's each asterisk counts as an ability. There's a bunch of abilities under the cyborgs, things like, implanted weapon in a fucking nemesis targeter system, which is, auto gun type shit, and enhanced reflexes and ghost camo and mounted weapons and all the fun shit that you'd expect. And some special abilities cost multiple points. So like enhanced reflexes Omega cost 3 points worth. So if they only have 3 asterisks next to their stat line, they can only have that one thing because it costs 3, blah, blah, blah. Then you have some human stat lines with some human special abilities, which the justification for human special abilities could be any kind of nonsense you want, basically, like, psychic abilities, custom tech, or maybe this guy's just built fucking different. You got fun things like Berserker and Body Shield or Bulletproof, Guns Ablazing, which just lets them attack twice as many times with a gun, or with anything. Veteran's Luck, which is the ability that lets you like reroll attacks. They can get Sure Shot to increase their fucking hit bonus. All sorts of the usual fun shit. And the human, same deal, a number of asterisks as like a point value to spend on special abilities. And then you have mutant animals, which are weird monster animals, like a ghoul bear, which has the ability to psychically fuck with your brain and also mimic the cries of their victims.
Oh, it's the fucking bear from Extinction. That's horrifying.
Maybe. Or the blinding bird, which can silently strike you and always surprises the party if you can't beat them in a notice check. Or this one's nasty. The flay snake. A species of mutated man-sized rattlesnake was cursed by the High Shine. Lore stuff. Its altered genome prevents it from forming scales, leaving its body raw and red, while the High Shine nanites force homeostasis and prevent it from dying of infection or fluid loss. The perpetual torment it experiences leaves it with a savage temper.
That's kind of horrifying.
Yeah. Their ability is fun. If they bite a victim, they have to make a physical save. On a success, you resist. On a failure, you take 1d6 system strain and must make a physical save the next round, continuing until you succeed or you die when your accumulated system strain exceeds your constitution.
Oh.
Yeah. The flay snake is brutal. Don't fuck with the flay snake.
Apparently, it is fucking brutal.
Yeah. And then we have mutated humanoids, which have all sorts of fun, weird lore attached to them because the mutated humanoids also come with the whole Albuquerque Death Zone stuff. Such as the Dusters, who are weird. They have mirror skin and chrome hair, and they're called Dusters because they have a crackling electrostatic dust cloud around them at all times. And they're like immune to lasers and can like perceive radio transmissions and shit.
Oh,
or cool, the eggheads that have subconscious like mind control abilities. Like they can influence people around them to cooperate with them without even doing anything. Or the Morlocks, which are they're Morlocks, just underground, fucking cave, weird tunnel cave creatures, people things. Or the Thornies, which are just vine blights from 5e. Just like weird humanoid vegetation. Then you have robots, lots of different robot enemies on various degrees of horrifying robot monster. One that I thought was particularly fun was the Hell Rider, which is called servants. The Hell Riders are servants of the Territorial Rangers. These centauroid robots fight with a pair of integral pistols that have an effective range of 100 meters. They're skilled trackers, and a posse of 2d6 of them inevitably accompany a ranger. Just weird, like, centaur cowboy enemies rolling around.
That's not horrifying at all.
Yeah, but they're robots. There's also the jangle snake, which is like a big giant metal snake with vibro teeth. There's also some rules for scrapping said robot enemies, repairing said robot enemies, and you can play a robot. There is a free robot origin focus if you would like to play a robot. And then you get the rules for the zombies, which kind of get their own whole dedicated section because they kind of have their own subsystem for how they work. So basically, when you're dealing with normal ass zombies, zombies by themselves, a singular zombie is completely trivial. You just hit them and they die. They have 1 HP always. And you cannot miss. They do not have an AC score, so you cannot miss. You can choose to fight zombies whenever you want because, you know, they're probably not chasing you that often, barring special circumstances. Obviously, zombies are quite durable because, you know, they don't need to eat or deal with warm or hot or anything like that, or food or really anything at all. Zombies are stupid. I mean, yeah, zombies are stupid. I don't know. I need to explain much there. And zombies swarm. One zombie is almost harmless, but there is never only one zombie. And now you might say, well, okay, that's regular zombies. Are there special zombies? Yeah, you bet your bippy there is. Such as leapers, crushers, spewers, titans, or shriekers. And if you're thinking those kind of sound like Left 4 Dead zombies, special zombies, they kind of are Left 4 Dead special zombies.
Yup, they kind of have that energy, yeah.
Yeah, like the leaper is pretty much a hunter or a jockey. The crusher is sort of a charger. The spewer is the bile spitting one. The titan is the tank.
Shrieker's the witch.
Shrieker's the witch, although not as terrifying as the witch.
Yeah, that doesn't do as much damage for sure.
Also, the Titan is described as a giant mound of flesh, like dead flesh, like monstrous giants of dead flesh and undying hunger. So, like, not necessarily shaped like a tank, but yeah. And then there is rules for zombie hordes. So, hordes of zombies either come in small, medium, or large. A small horde fills up like a large room or a building or a small building. A medium horde is like filling the streets or a city block. And then a large horde is a sea of undead flesh that can fill entire city neighborhoods. Basically, if the horde is the small, medium, and large hordes are their own stat blocks. They also do not have an AC. You can't. The only zombie stat line with an AC is the leaper. That's the only one you can miss. All the other ones you cannot miss. The horde. So the horde is innumerable, which means they're effectively immune to like single target weapons. You need some kind of area of effect, explosions or heavy automatic weapons, or collapsing a building on them, or hitting with a car or some shit. Zombie hordes are considered ubiquitous. So if you're in an area where there's a horde, like in a building or whatever, you are considered within range of the horde everywhere in the building, unless for some reason you know, some sort of fictional circumstance to get you out of quote unquote range. Then they have an ability called Savage, where every round the horde will use a main action to use an attack against every single victim within reach. So if there's 4 players in a house and there's a horde in the house, doesn't matter where you are in the house, once the horde goes for a round, everyone takes an attack. And then if nobody is within reach, the zombie will extend an arm, quote unquote, of the horde, which is say a bunch of zombies climb out from the horde. At 10 meters per round, 10 meters per move action, and once they reach the target, then you're going to be attacked. So they can move. They're not just like stuck where they are. And then they have the Ravenous ability, which is that you automatically suffer a D8 of damage every round simply for being in the presence of the horde. You can also get hit. You can also take a traumatic hit from the automatic damage. So it could, double. And then they have the Roadblock ability, which is basically they can do damage to a vehicle if the vehicle's within range, and then eventually, if they just bring the vehicle down to 0 hit points, there's just too many zombies. It's just too jammed up. And then they have the Grasping ability, which is if you try to move through the horde, they can make a grapple attempt against you at a +3. And if they succeed, you are grappled, and also they get to do more free damage to you. So horde can be quite dangerous if you're, not being careful. But there are also rules for distracting and eluding the hordes. So in terms of distraction, you can basically make a series of checks to, like you could put yourself as bait and try and make a run for it, or drive with a vehicle to try and break the horde up. Again, putting yourself as bait. And then the GM will roll 2d6, and then if the total is lower than your check, if the total is, let's do higher first. You make a roll. If the zombie horde rolls 2d6 and beats your check, then that many clumps of zombies are left around. So if you roll a 7 and the GM rolls a 2 and a 6, which would be an 8, that beats your check, there are 8 clumps of zombies still there after you tried to distract the horde. But if you roll a 9 and the GM rolls a 3 and a 4, okay, that's the total will be 7. That's less. You take the lesser of the two numbers on the D6 on the 2d6, so the 3 in this case. So there would be 3 clumps of zombies left to deal with. Distracted zombies will start filtering back to their horde in 3d6 minutes, which is not a ton of time, but when you're dealing with 6 seconds around is quite a lot if you're using initiative. And then the other option is you can, of course, just sneak past the zombies. As long as you can justify how you're sneaking around, the GM will let you make some nature of like a dex sneak check or some other, dex something check. Any kind of ability that you can kind of justify, modified by, a -2 or a +2 if the GM thinks it's like a good or a bad plan. And if you win the check, you can sneak past the area that the horde is in. If you fail, you alert the horde, and you have 2d6 rounds to escape the territory before the horde is roused and you start to suffer its attacks. So even if you fail to sneak, you have a chance to kind of deal with the situation. And if you are sneaking past a horde or through a horde or around them or whatever, but you stop to do something else like loot a room or like rescue a stranded victim, you then have to remake the stealth check after that, or the sneaking check, or however you're getting around them. But when you make the new check, the zombies get a +1 bonus to their roll to try and detect you. So basically, the more shit you stop and do along the way, the higher chance that they will eventually notice you, which makes sense. And then there are some zombie special abilities that work like the special abilities for all the other stat lines of the cyborgs and the humans and everything. Things like zombie regeneration, or like zombies that can move really fast, or zombies that are really big, so they have a lot of health. One that's particularly creepy with the zombie special abilities is the one called False Friend, which is where a zombie is so intact that it looks like a perfectly normal human being. If withdrawn and quiet, it instinctively uses this appearance to bait human prey.
Oh, I don't like that.
Yeah.
I don't like that it's cognizant enough to know that. Oh.
That is, yes, that does imply some horrifying things. So yes, if you would like to throw some special zombies in there. And then there's a whole bunch of rules about dealing with the infection itself. different options for how can the PCs become infected, such as a singular bite from a zombie, you're infected, tough shit. Well, you make a luck save. If you fail, tough shit. Or like excessive exposure, or the hot zone one, which is basically like a radiation zone, but for a zombie infection. And then there's what does the consequences of the infection, which is to say, what does it actually do to the player? One thing that's a little weird. So like is it the time bomb one? Symptoms become clear. No, it wasn't that one. Where's the one? There's one where it's like, oh, they become infected, but you have to track it in secret. But god damn it, now I can't find it. Oh, here it is. Zombie roulette. A very few infected somehow recover. Once infected, the GM secretly rolls a D10 on the. Oh no, it's not that one. No, it's not that one either. There's one where it was like you need to Oh, it was the first. I can't read. It was the first one. So it was time bomb. Once infected, the GM secretly adds 1d4 system strain to the victim every month, week, day, or hour, depending on how quickly the infection progresses. Symptoms become clear when their strain exceeds half their maximum. When it exceeds their maximum, they become a zombie. My question for that is, system strain is a number that the player tracks on their sheet. How do you secretly add system strain to their sheet without telling them? How would you?
You probably just have to either keep note of what their system strain is, or oh no, maybe. I guess you would just tell them like above board, like, oh, just like take one system strain and just never explain it.
But that's not secretly. You see what I mean? Because it says secretly adds 1d4 system strain. Right? How does that work? I don't understand. That confused the shit out of me. I was like, how would you do that? There was another one that has a similar thing. I can't remember what it was, but there's a similar one in here too. I was like, what?
Maybe you could keep a separate system strain, like you just duplicate theirs.
But their system strain is going to go up and down.
True.
And if you say to the player, like, hey, make sure you tell me what your system strain is at all times, they're going to be like, that's a suspicious thing to say.
Why would you say that, GM?
Yeah, why'd you say it like that? You know, like, so, I don't know. That's just a weird one. I just don't understand how. I probably would do what you said and just be like, yeah, add 2 system strain. If they ask why, you just kind of shrug at them. But like, yeah, I thought that was very weird. I was like, how would you do that secretly? I don't understand. Anyway. And then that gives you a couple options for curing infections. One is you just can't cure it. You're fucked. One is you can do like a drug treatment. Another one is a golden bullet, which is to say like, there's a beautiful there's like a miracle drug. The other one is cutting it out, which is you can like remove the infected tissue. Yeah. And then of course we have some 1-roll zombie plague generator tables. And then we have some zombie encounter quick reference tables, some more shit to roll on, just to like basically generate some really quick zombie horde groups for the players to deal with. And then we get to the last little bit, the nemesis traits. Did you look at this?
I'm gonna be honest, I did not.
Oh, you should have looked at this.
Oh.
So the nemesis traits, this is the last thing we're gonna cover. This is a really cool system for like making like really impactful antagonists. The nemesis traits are basically you take a really an explicitly super important NPC. They don't have to be an antagonist, but the nemesis traits are assumed to go on antagonists, but it could technically go on any NPC. Basically you give the NPC a superpower that is like intentionally broken, like straight up broken.
Okay.
It literally says these foes have nemesis traits. These are special qualities that are explicitly unfair and unreasonable. They may completely foreclose certain ways of dealing with them or make conventional methods impractically difficult. So the idea is you take like a notorious NPC of some nature and slap one of these traits on, and this particular element of them, they are like unstoppable in this regard. So for example, one of them is called the Invincible. This foe simply cannot be killed. They just can't die. You just cannot kill them in any way. Just get fucked, kid. There's another one called the Killer. This one I think is particularly funny just because I imagine doing this in play would be hilarious. The Killer can, as a main action, the foe can choose to attack a target susceptible to their current weapon. That target must make a luck save. On a failure, they die instantly. On a success, they are left mortally wounded with a major injury. No attack roll, no nothing. They just point at the target and say, you die now. They just power word kill their ass. And they can do that infinitely. Many times as they want.
Wow.
There's another one called the Messiah, which is basically you're like a super ultimate charismatic cult leader that can brainwash literally anyone, including the PCs. Now, technically, they're still PCs, so like you can't like straight up mind control them fully, but the Messiah, they can't act against, like he can mentally influence everybody that well. There's the Omened, which lets you just cause rolls to change. The foe and any allies present with them always succeed any saving throw and are treated as having veteran's luck edge, while any enemies present always fail any saving throws or skill checks. Twice per round as an instant action, the foe can dictate the outcome of any die roll in their general vicinity, even if they would normally be unaware that the associated action is being taken. That's the Omened.
Oh.
The Perfected is just amazing at everything. This foe gains a bonus main action every round. Also, every attack roll, every saving throw the foe makes is automatically treated as a natural 20. Every skill check is treated as a natural 12.
No.
They just don't miss. They're just that good. They just don't miss. This doesn't extend to damage rolls, but they do crit you every hit. So, yeah. The Protagonist, basically you just, whatever they want to do, there's no way there's no setback that will stop them. They will push to their goal no matter what, and the world seems to bend around them for what they're trying to do. The Strategist, who always knows what
I think the Protagonist is a little crazy. Sorry, just they cannot be they cannot be killed. They cannot be defeated.
No, they can be killed.
Protagonist says they cannot be killed.
Oh, does it say they can't be killed?
Yeah, they cannot be killed, and they cannot be defeated for long. And incredible luck, and that's kind of wild.
Yes, incredible luck and blessed coincidence will conspire to carry them through the worst setback.
You're basically Glupshido fighting Daryl Dixon from Walking Dead.
The protagonist plot armor ends as soon as their grand goal is achieved. The Strategist, they just always know what their enemy is planning. They just always have they're just Batman on cocaine. They're just like, they're Batman, but they can see every possibility across every timeline. And then you have the Tactician, where they just always make the smartest possible plan, always know exactly what the best maneuver is, and can always intuitively guess what the foe is going to do. Strategist and Tactician are a little similar. And then the Unseen, they can just, if they don't want you finding them, you just can't. You just will not find them. Whether it's like they're elusive, they have disguises, they're invisible, you just can't find them. So yeah, the Nemesis traits are wacky woohoo.
I do kind of love the idea that you're just fighting Rambo. It's like, there he is, and then he's gone.
Yeah, he's just bye-bye. And the idea is that if the Nemesis shows up, if the PCs want to stop them in some way, they need to come up with a very complicated plan maneuver to get around their bullshit. Which I think for all of them, I could see how you could get around pretty much all of them, except for maybe the Protagonist. That one I'm like, I don't know.
Yeah, so it says you have to either persuade them to change their goals, or twist their plan to serve the party.
Yeah, which is kind of crazy. It's just like you cannot stop them.
Yeah, I think it's like, yes, but if you blow up this town, we put your daughter in that town too. And you're like, oh, fuck. That's pretty much your best shot.
Yeah.
I kind of like the idea of fighting the protagonist because you might have to turn yourselves into villains just to like survive.
Right.
You might start doing shit that you're like, guys,
Are we the
baddies?
Yep. That's the nemesis traits. And then there's a brief bit of advice on creating your own nemesis traits if you would like. Also, the game is very explicit. If you give a character a nemesis trait, the PCs need to know. You can't just pull some bullshit where you pretend like you can't pretend like it's a normal enemy and then, oh, actually they have the killer trait and they just one-shot the players completely. Like, you know, they need to know it's a guy with the killer trait. Now, however you deliver that information is up to you, right? Like what kind of in-universe information, but they need to know that this guy is not to be fucked with. Don't pull some gotchas just for the lulz, because if your objective was to pull gotchas just for the lulz, you could always just say rocks fall and you die. Right?
I do think it's the idea is so funny. It's like, all right, I shoot him in the face. All right, you shoot him in the face. Nothing happens. And you're like, what?
Yeah. Nothing happens.
All right, I'd stab him. You don't stab him. What?
Hey, you just don't.
Do I get to roll?
Yeah.
No.
Yeah, no, you don't get to roll. I just say no to you. I just look at you and say no.
I hit him with my truck. Don't.
Yep. So
Holding.
That's where we're gonna bring it to a close. For Ashes Without Number. If you're curious what the rest of the book has in store, so there's the Albuquerque Death Zone, which is the preset setting, which is kind of a weird like Borderlands Fallout, but also cowboy Weird West thing going on. There's also an edge in the Albuquerque Death Zone called the Cowboy, which basically gives you a cowboy class.
Ooh, that sounds so much fun.
Where you have cowboy things like Trusty Steed, Eagle Eye, Iron Belly, Lightning Hands.
Tell me there's something called the Big Iron.
There is not the Big Iron. Missed opportunity. Yeah. But yeah, there's basically a cowboy class in there. And then the supplementary material, by the way, I really love that for this book, he actually just marked it off as supplementary material. Because in all the other books, like the deluxe edition content is towards the back, but there's no delineation necessarily. Whereas this, it's literally under a big section called supplementary material. Thank you. Just for organization's sake, I like that, you know?
Mm-hmm.
In the supplementary material, you have evil techno wizards. I don't think I need to explain what that is. They're evil. It's rules for playing an evil techno wizard, or using them as antagonists. You have ash sorcerers, which are basically like weird post-apocalyptic mages, but with like a little bit more subtle magic, not like full-on wizard shit. And then you have mentalist, which are if you want to play a survivor with psychic powers, but you don't want to use the psychic abilities from Stars Without Number, which are a little more higher power and require a bit more of like an investment. Then you can play the mentalist. And then there's rules for modular power armor, which is if you want your Fallout style, whatever the fuck it's called, the Brotherhood of Steel armor or whatever, right?
Yeah, the power armor.
Yeah. And then there's rules for hub settlement, which is basically you take the Enclave stuff and you make an even more detailed... You take the Enclave that the PCs live in and you make a more detailed, like, survival game style minigame out of the hub. Where there's, like, extra rules for, like, feeding food and water and popping. Basically, you turn the game into, like, Cult of the Lamb mode with the hub settlement rules, which actually might have been something that you wanted even more. So yeah. if you want to look at that section in the future for ideas. But yeah, it basically turns that whatever enclave the PCs are in, the hub settlement rules turns it into this little mini game of managing their home enclave.
You could use this, I mean, watching Trigun kind of on the brain right now, but if you gave the players the plot armor, like health condition, you can do a pretty solid job making a Trigun style game.
Yeah. Pretty easily, actually.
I want to play in that. I don't want to. Once again, I don't want to run that, but I want to play in that.
The only thing you're really missing out on is like Vash's weird plant powers, but that's probably fine.
I mean, you can put that in a mutation. Like, obviously, you can't do the fucking angel arm, but like,
I was gonna say you can't do the shoot the moon gun.
No, you can't shoot the moon gun, but you could do like knives as like grow blades out of your back and like.
That's true.
I mean, shit, you can do Legato's fucking like telekinesis
powers. Yep. So yeah, that's where we'll wrap it up on Ashes Outnumbered, the fourth of the Without Number games, and like we said before, maybe the last one. I don't know.
Fourth and potentially final.
Potentially final. I have no idea. Yeah. That's been us. Give us a follow on the socials if you want.
You could do a fucking Dodo Hidoro campaign. It'd be so. You could literally be Kaimon. Oh.
You could, yeah.
Fuck. Yes.
Yeah. Yet another banger. Side note, this might be the best of the Without Number games.
In terms of its general design, I'm inclined to agree. It's been streamlined a lot. My general feeling towards the writing of these games, it is the writing is simplified and like I think it's organized a little bit better.
Yes, I think there's better organization. I also just feel like this one has the most interesting like bespoke mechanics for it.
It does.
All the like the disease and the radiation and the stress rules and like the zombie rules. I love the zombie shit. The different enemy. This has the most like diverse enemy, like creatures of the waste, like bestiary bit. So yeah, I don't know. Probably his most solid work, which is good, but also it's even better because his most solid work, and then you can just take all of the good bits from this game that you want and put it in the other games, no problem. So it's kind of a win-win across the board.
It really is. The modularity in mind does wonders for this game design and longevity.
Yes, and also makes the older games like more valid.
Yes, better.
Stars Without Number becomes better by Ashes existing.
It really does.
Yeah. So,
anyway, and if you were playing Stars and you wanted to have Tatooine, now you have bespoke rules for making Tatooine.
It's true. All right, get the fuck out of here.